Welcome back to another edition of the Pillars of Progress podcast. I'm Travis Justice, and today we're talking about an organization that has been changing lives in our community for more than a century, Child Saving Institute. Now, if you drive down Dodge Street, you've probably noticed the major transformation that has happened on their campus. Well, that expansion is more than bricks and mortar. It's about meeting growing needs, creating trauma-informed spaces, and preparing for the future of child and family services in our region. Joining me today is Jaymes Sime, President and CEO of Child Saving Institute. Now, Jaymes is a thoughtful, mission-driven leader who understands both the heart and hard work behind nonprofit leadership, from service expansion and community partnerships to navigating growth, funding challenges, and long-term impact. Now, we cover a lot of ground in this conversation, like why was the expansion needed, what CSI really does, and how leadership, grit, and lived experience shape the way Jaymes leads. And welcome back to another edition of the Pillars of Progress podcast. I'm Travis Justice, and today we're talking about the Child Saving Institute, and with me is the President and CEO of Child Saving Institute, Jaymes Sime. Hello, sir.
Hey, Travis. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. How's your new year?
We're getting ready for a new year. I was just talking about, I think next year's like the year of the horse, which is supposed to be a hard charging year, which this was supposed to be the year of the snake, I guess. Sorry for folks if I'm wrong. And I was like, well, what's the horse? And they're like, yeah, you really go. I was like, well, if that wasn't 2025, I'm a little terrified for 2026, but it's also exciting to flip the calendar and start to look ahead.
Well, let's just jump right in, because you mean the hard charging. If people drive up and down Dodge Street and they drive by Child Saving Institute all the time, they'll notice that you just completed a rather large construction project, a major expansion to the campus, a lot to take on. Why was that needed for Child Saving Institute?
Yeah, and I think, one thing, obviously, facilities with age and time, they need renovation and kind of updating, but we're also seeing the need for service expansion. So our outpatient behavioral health services, our early childhood education program, and our youth shelter specifically, we were looking to expand those services to grow the number served, but also kind of bring it to 2025 standards of care for those specific programs. So it's kind of a practical thing, is the facilities needed updated, your roof, HVAC, some mechanical challenges, but also a look to the future as what are the community needs, how does CSI respond to those needs, not only today, but to the future. So yeah, a pretty significant expansion, a pretty significant renovation.
Of the expansion, what new spaces are you looking most forward to utilizing, and what will those new spaces contribute to the community? Yeah,
I think it's one thing. I have a lot of ideas, but we kicked open our doors and hosted an open house. And I kid you not, I received a random LinkedIn message from somebody who had come through the open house. We had about 300 individuals come through the doors, and I think they saw what we tried to create, which is a space that feels warm and welcoming. Lingo would be trauma-informed, but sometimes that's a little bit too scientific for folks. And so I think just generally that's the vibe that we wanted to create. So you come in and you need to access our therapy services. That's how you feel when you walk in the front entrance of that clinic. And into our shelter, it's the same thing, working with teenage boys. We wanted a space that obviously could meet some of their needs. Having a gym and a fitness area now is a huge upgrade, but also the way that looks and feels for those youth. And so I think a lot to be said. Obviously, the form and function of a building, you need bathrooms, you need offices, you need cubes. But for those folks coming in our doors, whether it's a single time or whether they're going to be receiving outpatient mental health services for the next 18 months, we do want that to look and feel a certain way. So really happy that we were able to achieve those results.
Now, this could be a loaded question. I know, because I sat on the board at one time at Child Saving Institute, but I think there's a lot of people in the Omaha Metro that don't know what Child Saving Institute is. And it's a lot, so you can pontificate as long as you want, but tell people what exactly Child Saving Institute does.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot, and I think I can get on my soapbox about nonprofits as a whole, right? So nonprofits typically don't invest in telling the story, right? They're typically underinvested in marketing, some resources to development. If you look at for-profit businesses, typically they're investing heavily in sales and marketing because that ultimately is what drives customers to their door. And I think CSI, so over 133 years serving the community, but it kind of done so in a workman-like manner, kind of that blue collar, like just put our head down and do the work and continue to respond. So you do that for 133 years, you pick up all bits and pieces. And so in today's version, we are truly a multi-service agency. So there's not a single kind of canopy that would describe everything that we do. So everything from early childhood education, of which we'd serve kids as young as 6 weeks old, all the way to our youth shelter, which would serve youth up to 18, our teen and young parent program, which would serve young parents up to the age of 26, our outpatient therapy services, which may be supporting the whole family. So you might be supporting a mom and a dad, and who knows, they might be 30 or 40, and the kiddo that they're trying to raise might be 3 years old. And so we're multi-service. Family and child are our primary. That's our sweet spot. That's where we've been now since the late 1890s. That's where we remain. But we do that in a variety of ways. And I could spend 20 minutes talking about that, and I need to get the elevator pitch down, but there's just so much that a sentence or two wouldn't do it, the justice necessary to describe everything that we do. And then with the changes this year, because not only did we kick open the doors to a new facility, but we also did a merger with an organization that's over 140 years old in Council Bluffs, and they do different services as well. Similar founding story, similar service array, but different residential services than we have done typically, different community-based services than CSI has done typically.
You mentioned a merger. So does that merger, are you talking about Children's Square?
Yeah.
So does that fall under the CSI umbrella now?
Yeah.
And is that just one of those things where you're running a nonprofit almost like a business, your nonprofit,
Yep.
but I'm going to use the word for-profit business, where you're either growing or you're dying, and you're like, okay, we need to continue to grow and offer more.
Yeah. I think it was, a couple things probably happening in the reality. I think nonprofits are not immune to the headwinds that businesses face. And so there's a challenge, and you see that within our for-profit partners. You see businesses merge and businesses get acquired all the time. Sometimes that's the whole strategy of the business to eventually grow up and become acquired. This was not the case with Children's Square. They had served the community over 140 years. So obviously we believed in the mission, we believed in the services, but there just became a time where things were becoming increasingly complex for the organization to operate independently. And that's financial, some of the governance challenges, navigating COVID, coming out of COVID. And so really could the timing be a little different just based on volume of things we had going on at CSI? Yes. But also the alignment between what they do and the DNA of who we are as the organization. So I would just say it was kind of one of those things that fell into our lap, but also became a necessity. And, I think there was a reality that if we or somebody else was unable to step in, really the community could continue to lose services. And we know, those families across the river, those kids across the river have just as much need as, the folks that we had typically served in Omaha. So I think it's that opportunity. And I think to your point, yeah, absolutely. I'm one as a leader, I believe. I don't know if you're not growing, you're dying, and that's the quote, but I do believe you should be looking towards the future. And, if we were to turn our eyes away from this opportunity, I think it would have been a missed opportunity because it has completely changed the size and scale of who we are as an organization. We'll be a $26 million operating budget next year. We were, $10 million in 2021. So that's a pretty significant growth for any business, let alone a nonprofit.
So, how hard is that for you as a leader? You've just doubled your operating budget.
Right.
That changes the way you lead and being a nonprofit. Do you find yourself leading the organization, or do you find yourself fundraising more than you want to?
Yeah, well, and I think that's, it's kind of part of being a nonprofit leader is, sometimes, a lot of times I'm wearing that fundraising hat. Sometimes that's in very traditional fashion where, I'm literally asking for funds, but sometimes I'm the ambassador, I'm the face of the organization. So even taking opportunities like this to talk about the mission and be out there is really, I think, a core part of a CEO. And so thankfully that's what I kind of like to do, get out there and, connect people to our mission and to our work. The mission really does, once you're kind of be able to put the right person in the right spot, the mission kind of sells itself. I will say, though, we are in some complex, financial times just generally. And so our ability to secure donations broadly, obviously what we're seeing for, low income individuals, middle income individuals who may have typically thrown us a little bit of money, we're seeing some of those donors be a little hesitant because things are probably tough at home. So that does put a little more pressure on our higher level donors and, the ability to support the merger, to support the capital campaign, and then, yes, support that operations, which has expanded significantly.
You mentioned the mission, and I would probably assume that there's similar cultures as well. But before you take on a merger like this, I mean, how much homework had to go into it? Was it a snap decision, or was there a lot of due diligence that took place?
Yeah, there was, we were involved in the background conversationally, probably for 6 months before we are actually doing anything technically. And then really October of 2024, we started doing some consulting with them. They had an absence of leadership and needed some short-term support. Regardless of where that was going to go, we found the opportunity. Some members of our executive team started to do some functional work, and we had an agreement in place. And so in addition to seeing how the organization runs and works, from a functional standpoint in that consulting agreement, we started to do due diligence as well. And I would say that approach is probably very similar to a for-profit business that's looking at, an acquisition or a merger. So, we're looking into the financials. Obviously, we're checking to see if there's anything legally out there, looking at personnel, trying to align systems, looking at the facilities. What do we have here? What are the needs there? And so through that, probably, a solid 6 to 8 months, we were doing a lot of due diligence, and we found out we needed to raise some money to do this the right way, raise some operating reserves, raise some money to support some of the facility needs that can't be deferred any longer. So yeah, we got to see kind of under the hood, but I mean, culturally, there's differences, 140 years of culture. We have 133 years of culture. And, when leadership transitions, they've had a couple leadership transitions in the last 5 years. Sometimes those folks on the front lines, get missed or lost in the shuffle, and they're doing incredibly complex work. And so a big part of this is us listening to those individuals that are doing the work. And as an organization now, CSI, trying to respond to those needs. And some of that is going to be enhancing their facilities and making sure they're better for the clients and better for the staff. But some of that is just listening, being responsive, and whether that's adjusting wages, creating different roles that are supportive in nature, putting better systems in place. And so we're kind of, that process, Travis, is probably going to take the next 3 to 5 years from really aligning. I mean, our systems are obviously, they're in our systems. We're all in the same systems. But for it to really take root, I mean, we can still kind of see the differences today, which is not surprised. We're 3 months into the deal. But based on what we know the complexities are with people change, it's just going to take some time.
You've used the word leadership quite a bit. You're relatively new to CSI in the grand scheme of things. Yeah. What attracted you to CSI? You were at Micah House, you were at Boys Town. Yeah. What attracted you to CSI?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. I was fortunate to, have an executive coach at the time, and when we were doing an assessment as to loving the work that I was doing at Micah House, but knew that wasn't going to be a forever thing, but also didn't know what the timeline was. And my executive coach at the time said, what's the size of organization that you'd be interested in running, and what's the mission have to have? And, the mission had to serve some element of children and families. That's work that I've done my entire professional career. And that's advice that I got from a professor back at the University of Northern Iowa. I thought at one point in time I was going to go into law enforcement, and he saw this, a very passionate individual who wanted to impact change. And he thought, yeah, you probably be better off serving children and youth and doing that, and serving the whole family dynamic allows me to do that. So children and families had to be core to the mission, and looking at growing as a professional, growing as a leader, the organization had to be kind of larger in size. And so, ironically enough, we said children and families and roughly a $10 million operating budget. Well, the CEO at CSI retires, the posting goes live, but, oddly enough, or ironically enough, I'm in the midst of doing a capital campaign fundraising for an early childhood center over at Micah House. And I was like, well, that's super awkward. I'm the guy that's out selling this need for this thing, and now I'm over here. And so there was a time where I was like, you can't control when opportunities come and go. I've committed to Micah House and getting this thing done. Kind of woe is me, kind of, feeling bad for myself. And then I got a call from a funder who said, Jaymes, I don't know if you've looked at this, and I don't know if you've considered this. And that allowed me to have a very candid conversation to say, hey, what are your thoughts as a funder if I'm over here running this other organization, passionate and wanting to do good things, and I were to throw my name in the hat over here? And I think her response and kind of empathy in that situation freed me of my kind of belief that I can't do that because of the thing. And so here I am a little over 4 years later, and have, had good luck with good people. I mean, really, you're doing community-oriented work, and it takes takes a village. It really does to make the mission move. It takes so many people. At best, I occasionally get to be a catalyst to get the thing moving with some momentum, and then it's several of us kind of rowing and moving together.
Where did your drive for nonprofits come from? Was it your mom? Was it your dad? I mean, because it takes a special person to work in the nonprofit world. It takes a special person to work with the stuff you see every day. Where did that come from?
Yeah, something I've been asked before and thought about many times. I knew from a really young age that I wanted to help people. I alluded to a professor at the University of Northern Iowa kind of saying, go work with children and, kind of youth. That would be more advantageous. But I really thought, I want to help people, and I thought I was going to go into law enforcement. And so I set out the University of Northern Iowa, my undergrad's in criminology, minor in sociology, and it really was, Professor Joe Gorton at the University of Northern Iowa. I did a class called Correctional Treatment and Counseling, and I had the opportunity to go to the Waterloo Residential Correctional Facility and do a case plan with an adult who was transitioning out of the penitentiary into the community, and the RCF is kind of that middle ground. And literally the class I had to go in, met in the clinic of the residential correctional facility. So there's like a hospital bed here, there's like needles on the wall, and there's me, this college kid who probably had sung karaoke the night before on the hill in Council Bluffs. And, I have to tape record it, and you have to submit all these tape recorders of this whole treatment plan. And I don't know, just hit record, and, I'm like, okay, now I'm sitting across from this, 40, 50-year-old guy who's been in and out of penitentiary, been arrested dozens of times. And I don't know, I've always had ability to connect with folks. I start like introing who and this guy starts like crying, like 3 minutes into this deal. And I'm like, I don't know what's happening. We continue the conversation. I turn in these tapes, think nothing of it. Again, I was the kid in college who appreciated more of the social side of things. So a professor asking me to stay after class, I was like, oh gosh, what did I do? It was before AI, so I knew I didn't do like any sort of cheating. Like it was all my work, but it was probably terrible. And he's like, in all my years teaching this class, I've never had somebody cry on tape, so he could pick up on the emotion and my response to it on that tape. And he didn't listen to the whole tape, but typically, obviously the first session, he'd listen to the first few minutes and he'd go through and sample the tapes. And he was the one that said, I think you know you want to do this, but I'm going to challenge you. Take an internship at the state training school in Eldora, Iowa, which was 45 minutes away at the time. see if you like it. So I did that. He put me in contact with the superintendent there. I did an unpaid internship. I'm driving 45 minutes each way. They end up hiring me before I graduate. So I start, work in that residential facility for 3.5. Learned pretty quickly that I'm not a state employee, although they told me once you worked here 3.5 years, once you have IPERS, you're never going to leave. I was like, oh my gosh, that's like terrifying. There's a lot of life out there. But I was like, I do like this idea of helping people, but also figured I was bullheaded enough. I had some opportunities to lead as a kind of a student supervisor at the dining center while I was there. In athletics, I was always kind of like a captain or captainess person. So I always had this desire to lead. And so I kind of was like, I like the helping the kids thing, putting the law enforcement thing probably permanently on the back burner. And, kind of the career started to show itself. My first executive director role was $17 an hour part-time in Waterloo, Iowa for an organization that was about 2 years, it was a founders organization. So I was doing that 30 hours a week. I was paid for 20 hours a week, but I wanted to do a real good job and be hired full-time. And I was now back at the University of Northern Iowa working 45 hours a week because I had left the training school as I was trying to make this kind of transition into more of a thing. And so moved here in 2012 and the rest is history. So I think as a child, my mom, raised by a single mom, I have 5 brothers and sisters. We benefited from a lot of the services. Now, as a kid, you're not consuming these services saying, oh, this is life-changing. I'm going to go do the same thing. But I look back, and whether that's food assistance my mom received literally through SNAP benefits or informally through community members saying this ragged bunch of folks needs something and we're going to try to speak into it, or the house we literally grew up in. We spent 6 months of my childhood, couch surfing, literally homeless in an abandoned house for a while. And the house my mom still lives in today, she was able to get a loan through an organization support, Southeast Iowa Community Action. And so literally without that nonprofit, who the heck knows? I know housing was hard to come by for 7 people on my mom's income. And without a nonprofit stepping in to do that. So now that's my Care Bear. I'm so passionate about it because I do believe whether the kid or family in the moment can recognize what we're attempting to do based on the service, I don't know. But I do hope there are children who are receiving something from us, and 30 years from now, they're going to recognize that moment, that hand that reached out, that social worker that sat in my living room. That was a thing that was pretty impactful, even though when you're this close to it, you don't know. And that's really why I try to do it every single day.
See, I didn't know that about your mom. And I think you just answered the question deep down is that you lived this firsthand and you got through it. It's not easy to get through, right? Your life could have gone 2 different directions, being, couch surfing, homeless, single mom. Because you see it probably every single day, kids in similar situations, but whether it's choices or just whatever, it goes completely the opposite. So not only can you lead an organization, but you can, if you wanted to, you could go down in your shelter and talk firsthand that you've lived this. Yeah,
and I do. I appreciate those opportunities. I think the one thing that I'm, understanding is, our situation was situational. My mom didn't come from generational poverty. There wasn't a lot of generational trauma that existed. There was trauma that we all experienced as an immediate family, and there's significant ramifications that happen even in that compressed window of time. And so, I'm absolutely empathetic to people who come through our doors, regardless of their experience. Even though, my situation might not be able to relate directly, I do have this profound empathy, specifically for moms. I'm not even a parent myself, but I have this utmost pride for parents who are doing it every single day. Seeing my mom, again, in the moment, you're not appreciating that mom can't come to your baseball game and you're having to ride your bike up and, maybe you can't have all the things and you're wondering why you can't go to the wrestling tournament in Keokuk because you can't afford the fee or you don't have transportation. You don't understand that. And the kid, you're trying to get what all your friends are getting. And I was aware that my experiences were definitely different. And, even to be able to get a sports physical Fortunately, we had a chiropractor in town that would, do my mom a solid for a nominal fee to get our sports physicals taken care of. But that was always a challenge every single year going into the academic year. Once you started doing athletics at the middle and high school level and they started requiring that, the financial barrier that created a challenge, let alone you're going to go on a weekend wrestling tournament and you have to kind of find some sort of meal stipend for yourself. And then that created a complexity for me because eventually as soon as I was able to work, I had to work, but I loved athletics, but there was always this imbalance. Like I couldn't give my everything to athletics, although I was athletically gifted, because I was always working a part-time job in the summers, sometimes 2 jobs, because car insurance, clothes, right? Anything that I wanted to look and feel like the kids that I was associating with, that all became my responsibility as soon as I was able to throw a newspaper first, wash dishes second, tear shingles off a roof third, did a little bit of everything to kind of scrape by through that. So very empathetic as a human because of that.
But also a life learning experience. It probably translates into leadership.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Yeah, I think, if you've ever tore shingles off a roof or you've never wrestled, those are 2 humbling things. Nothing like being put on your back in front of a few hundred people while the cheerleaders are saying, be aggressive, be loud, trying. And so, hard work definitely translates. And really that kind of tenacity that comes with that, having the other guy have their hand raised. There's a lot that through sports, through hard work, that definitely translates to leadership. That's the type of grit that, you look at a project that we just completed. There are days that are great. There are weeks that are great, but there are times that are incredibly tough and like your belief. And sometimes it's the absence of fact in the moment that this is going to work out. And I think that's definitely a skill set when you grow up scrapping around, you learn to, I'm going to have to be the one to figure it out. Fortunately, with a role like CSI, I don't have to pick up the phone too many times to find somebody who is, let's figure it out. So sometimes I get into trouble where Jaymes has to just figure it out independently. That there were times growing up. Now the community is so receptive of what we're doing, and I have such a talented team around me, talented board of directors that, it's a text message, an email, a phone call away when we're dealing with real challenging stuff. But there are times where absolutely, as the leader, you have to be the catalyst to get going, and you have to be the person that believes that this can happen in spite of some of the real challenges that you're facing. Now,
as a fellow Iowan, I'm a little disappointed. You're too young to say you could walk beans, but the fact that you didn't mention detasseling corn really disappoints me.
My siblings, I think they did okay financially, but I was pretty good at tearing shingles off. And I started to learn, my value. I remember I was paid, I'm not going to mention the roofing company. I don't know if they're still in business. I was paid under the table and in cash. And
the best way, by the way. Not the most legal, but it's still the best way to be paid.
Yeah, so, but I learned pretty early on, like hard work does translate to that. And I would just get up on this roof with literally the tool's called a bulldog, occasionally use a pitchfork depending on what you're doing. And I would just and I remember some of the guys that were a little bit older are like, hey, what are you doing here? But the guy literally called me off the roof on 2 separate occasions and said, like, you keep that up. And he'd grease the wheels a little bit, and I was a poor kid, and that's all you really had to do for me. Give me I don't know what I was drinking at the time. I might have been dipping in the Mountain Dew at the time. Wasn't yet turned on to coffee, but that came in a couple years. You do that work early enough on summer days. It's really hard to gear up to get up on a hot roof. But it was a really interesting experience. And there's a lot of that, I think those moments of time that, again, in the moment, I'm not like, well, yeah, I'm tearing off roofs. This is going to really, the skill that this is teaching me is really going to change my life. But really, I do have this belief that hard work goes a long way, and buckling down and doing things, and the reward that you feel as an individual. And I think that's something that we try to talk about with our clients as well. Sometimes they just need that initial momentum. Life has seemed so complex that what's the first step or two that I need to take to get to start to fill a couple wins? And, everyone wants to feel that, whether you're University of Iowa Hawkeye wrestling team. I was Hawkeye wrestling, and growing up in the 90s, Gable and the crew were winning a whole lot of national championships, and as a little kid wrestling, that was like put on Dan Gable in the wrestling room, and my coach was getting so psyched up. So that also kind of helped. And like, I was even looking at YouTube a couple weeks ago, looking at some of the old Gable kind of quotes, because you talk about somebody who's got an approach to life and approach to work. Something to be said about that.
It's funny. I just watched a Dan Gable story last night, and his grandchildren are wrestling. His granddaughters are wrestling at Iowa City High. And I'm like, can you imagine the pressure those girls are under? That Dan Gable is your grandfather, and he's at every meet watching. I mean, that would be a lot of pressure. Has nothing to do with this podcast, but
it's important.
But it's important, especially
for Iowa.
Well, but I think Dan Gable transcends Iowa. I think if you are familiar with Olympians, if you're familiar with leadership and coaching, I mean, he's right up there with one of the greatest coaches of all time, but it also shows you mentioned your passion for athletics, how athletics can put you in the right direction for leadership, for teamwork, with working with others. That's why I find it interesting. You put like a place for people to be active in a new space. I think that plays a part in getting along with others and learning to work with others.
Yeah, it's a huge part. And I think those skills for our youth and the ability to do that on site, we're even looking at those spaces right now and saying, it's fine to have a gym where they can shoot hoops or equipment that they can go lift on, but we want to create some opportunities for community volunteers to do that with a little bit more intentionality and start to build in some of that discipline. Because one thing to say it's your rec time, you're going to go put up some hoops. Maybe, I don't even know if they're still playing pig or horse or whatever. But it's another thing to say, hey, yeah, we're going to do that. But for 20 or 30 minutes, we're going to do some warm-ups and we're going to do some stretching, and maybe we're going to do a couple sprints, and we're going to apply some intentionality to what will eventually be fun. We're going to have fun here as well. And I think that's everything. And I think as it relates to leadership, process, intentionality, setting that vision where you want to be, right? If you want to be holding the proverbial trophy at the end of the year, great, let's vision that. But now let's back it up and say, that starts with us communicating well as a team. And what do those standards need to look at like amongst each other? Who's going to be the one that calls a foul when we've broken one of our norms and values? And that happens on every good athletic team. And when that doesn't go well, we can see that as well. And in the era we're in today, you probably covered on that when that doesn't go well, it's very public now within those sports teams. But I think that's one of the prime lessons to take away. Absolutely.
You're a positive guy. I mean, the glass is half full with you. People may not understand, but there's a lot of different funding mechanisms. How much do you rely on state aid, and how much do you find yourself in Lincoln, talking to committees and because, there's cuts everywhere. Yeah. How much does the state help CSI out?
Yeah, I mean, that's changed over time. I will say it's going into 2026, it's less, right? The state has just made a decision in 2025 to move kinship care, which is, for folks who are familiar or not with foster care, foster care would be placing a child with somebody who the child was unaware with. Kinship care would be a family or friend who knew the child and knew the family. And so you talk about up until October, CSI was providing kinship care, support to those families providing the care, and doing foster care. Well, now kinship care has gone back into the state's control. They're saying for a financial reason, we're saying, I don't know if that's what's best for kids. That's our mission, is we champion what's best for children and families. We're kind of waiting to see how that plays out. And so that's just one example to say, absolutely, the state is under some financial pressures as they reduce kind of the tax levy on individuals and corporations. Money has to come from somewhere, and so they're looking at social services. And some hands, I'm like, yeah, we can find efficiencies, but my concern really is my kind of social worker heart and brain is if we're removing opportunity or services for children and families today, be careful of are we really saving money? Because the lifetime cost for the impact of that. So our support functionally from the state that's not passed through dollars is probably in the few hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. We get some Title 20 funding for our early childhood center. We do foster care. But I think kind of a misnomer for folks who don't really know nonprofits is, the state and federal governments just kind of I go to the backyard and get the money tree. A lot of what we do now are contracts. And so it'd be no different that the state wants to build a road from here to Lincoln, and MCL is going to bid on doing the work. Well, they open up a foster care contract. They have a need. This is kids and families that the state is pulling into the system, and they're looking to contractors to serve the family. Now, we're trying to create positive outcomes, but that's typically our relationship with the state anymore, is as a contractor. And I think the difference is, what I always say is, MCL likely wouldn't do too many of those contracts if at the end of it, the state was paying MCL 80 cents on the dollar for to do the work. MCL would just say, this isn't good for business. And that's what we've run into with some of our state or federal partners is when we're getting 80 cents on the dollar to do a state or federal contract and then having to turn to our friends in private philanthropy to supplement that, there's a little bit of rub because private philanthropy wants to be creating the new solutions or truly filling gaps. They don't necessarily want to be filling the void that should be covered through state taxpayers by a state service. And there's probably multiple podcasts we can do on that dynamic. So definitely we're educating senators about that reality and those challenges, because you look at the project we just completed. Well, the contract for the youth shelter is with the state, and we're getting referrals from the county. Neither of them invested in the capital infrastructure for us to provide the service. Private philanthropy, thankfully so, stepped in and did that entirely. Same thing to say about where do you host your foster care staff? We need a facility to do that, right? They need a cubicle, they need restrooms. And so we are very fortunate as a community that private philanthropy bears a lot of those capital costs, because even when we're doing services in partnership with our state partners, a lot of times those the facilities needs. Occasionally there's one-off grants. There was a lot of ARPA funds, stuff that through COVID, but I think there's going to be some impacts. As things get tighter, those funds are going to become less and less. And that's going to create an additional challenge that nonprofits have to navigate.
So if somebody wants to get involved with CSI, and besides money, let's take money out of it, what's the best way, and where's the biggest need, and what's the best way to get involved if somebody want to get involved?
The thing I've been saying now is take us to the dinner table. So if you need more information to do that, right, jump on our website, childsaving.org, follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever you want to do. Become a champion of our mission. I think if we can be more conversations at dinner parties and dinner tables, and dinner tables might mean a family's having a dinner and a parent's using our services, and some of the folks who are as a teaching moment to their kids about what some kids have experienced or what they have and don't have. And so that's an easy way, is to kind of take our mission off paper. If you've been through the facility, great. Now be a kind of ambassador of that with folks that you're talking to, because ultimately that may lead to a donation. Or the other way that I want to talk about is get on our website, childsaving.org, and say you want to volunteer. And that could be a one-time volunteer opportunity, or you could do a diaper drive, or we are looking for people who want to engage with our youth and our youth shelter for more of a long-term opportunity. Shooting hoops, taking them through art activity, to, guiding them through music activity. We really want those kids to be engaged in meaningful activities that any teenager would enjoy, and we'd like to find some volunteers to partner in that. So, the no-cost ways is become an ambassador, or raise your hand and come in and volunteer and support the mission that way. And if you don't have time for that, and you don't want to be an ambassador and you have means, obviously, our mission is always going to benefit from financial contributions. That's what's allowed us to stay in the community for 133 years. That's how we're going to exist for the next 133. We can't do it without the community. We've been super fortunate. I think we are one of the original nonprofits in the community. I think our founder did a great job kind of being a part of the culture of philanthropy that we now sometimes take for granted as nonprofits, but the community as a whole. We have such a giving community. We're happy to be a part of that history. I'm also happy to carry that forward.
We call this Pillars of Progress. Jaymes, you are a pillar, and there's so much progress at CSI. Congratulations on all your success, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, appreciate the time, Travis.